All right, welcome everyone to our monthly Boise ITSM Talks meeting. We are on October 26th, 2023 already as we head into the finishing touches of fall and head toward Thanksgiving and Christmas holidays. Really glad to have the opportunity to have a meeting this month and appreciate the opportunity to co-present with my true friend and really person I admire and look up to. Bruno is here to co-present with me on experience. We're going to be combining how we talk about driving positive experiences through the use of the ITIL 4 guiding principles, with a little bit of a caveat on one of those principles, which I'm bringing back into the conversation. So Rayanne, thank you for being here. Want to introduce yourself real quick to the group?
Thank you, Jeff. I'm Bruno. I have been focusing on experience for quite a bit, and then have been in the ITSM world forever. So I'm pretty excited about this. I have mutual admiration for you as well, Jeff, and I'm excited that we're able to bridge these two, right? Because a lot of times people ask about ITSM versus continuous service improvement versus experience, and I hope that you can see how it bridges some of those gaps as we go through.
All right, fantastic. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get us started with walking through the presentation. And let me get my video out of the way so I can make sure I can see what I'm going to be talking about as well as possible here. We're going to start off with an introduction from Rayanne. And like I said, our presentation is about driving positive experiences through the use of guiding principles. So Rayanne, I'll have you kick us off, and you want to introduce the first couple of slides.
Okay, sure. As many of you are aware, the guiding principles are incredibly practical. The reason they even put them in place was to really bring it up to what's happening today. And regardless of where you are, whether you're doing DevOps or lean or anything agile, these are very practical points on how to improve processes or just how to do everything better. So today our goal is to go through the guiding principles and apply them from an experience perspective as well. And I'll explain experience a little better in about a slide or so.
Yeah, and real quick, just so that the audience is paying attention here to this slide, does anybody recognize anything different about this slide than maybe what they've seen before?
I was trying to keep it a secret for you.
Okay, thought I'd ask them.
No, I think that's great.
Okay, well, we'll see. We'll see if they can see what's maybe a little bit different there.
Okay, so something I'd like to introduce you to, and something I've been spending my time on for a few years now, is the idea of experience. And this is our latest, first of all, this is owned by Experience Collab, and this is the latest experience optimization framework diagram. So to just walk you through it temporarily, or just very high level, you'll notice, and I just realized I could use do I have the ability to annotate? To use my pointer? I don't think so. Okay, well, if you start a little bit to the right, like 5 after, if you're looking at it like a clock, you see evangelize. And evangelize is where a lot of people start with experience. The idea of experience is to go beyond transactional measures and to really understand potentially the employee experience, whether it be within IT or the people you support, or even your customer experience. So evangelize is getting it started. And then explore is understanding where you are. And we'll speak to these as we go through in quite a few areas and see how the guiding principles actually can take you through. And just you see the others: envision, enable, execute, and embrace. And it's just a matter of how do we get to a point where we are able to build an experience level agreement and we are able to really focus on experience as an overall organization.
I can maybe help you with that, Rayanne. I can use mine if I'm driving and sharing, and
There we go. That's good.
let's move these around if that helps.
There, that would have been. Yeah, and just on the outside, that just pretty much tells you what everything is. And so we'll speak to some of these as we're going through the principles. So I'll let you go ahead.
So the first one that we're going to talk about as we walk through, oops, my sharing stopped. Sure, I must have hit that accidentally. Sorry about that. Get that back. First one that we talk about as we walk through the guiding principles is focus on value. And the big thing with focusing on value is we look at value and how we define it in ITIL 4 is really based on preferences and perceptions. And it's subjective. And when we tie that in with the experience standpoint, we know that we're going to have positive and negative experiences based on our different interactions and touch points with the service provider. And ultimately, the question that we ask when we look at formulation of value is, how do stakeholders feel about our services as well as our interactions between the two parties? And when we look at what we're going to build on, when we look at the experience framework, understanding how we look at those things and capture that information and then measure and report out on it to improve the overall experience is what we're going to be talking about. Value, of course, is not just about the worth of something or the monetary worth. I think it's important to look at the fact that there's some things that aren't always tangible in that conversation. And for those of you that have taken ITIL 4 class, we know that we have to start with answering some basic questions around who are our service consumers, or our customers, and what are they wanting from us? And then how do we meet those needs through capturing that demand and then responding to it? But we also can't just be paying attention to that aspect. We have to look at the importance of positive experiences. And if we don't do a good job in that space with understanding those needs and then using that to measure and improve the experience, then our users are going to find better alternatives. And it's extremely important in the concept of employee experience, where if we don't do a good job as a service provider, especially in IT, with adopting the latest and greatest digital technologies and making that experience positive for where people are working, if we're behind the curve on that, people are going to go work elsewhere. And I think it's really important to understand some of those dynamics. So we've got to build relationships. We've got to have an outside-in approach. And ultimately, as we're focusing on value, we can't just do this in silos. We've got to do it within other groups, HR, our executives, having a comprehensive approach for how we focus on value and ultimately value co-creation and how we go about realizing value. And as we look at focusing on value and what the customer and user experience is comprised of, it's really the following three things. It's those perceived brand touch points and the different interactions that create those moments over time. It's how we incorporate our understanding of the perceived service environment. And I emphasize the word perceived there. How does that feel in terms of the context of understanding the customer or the user or the employee? And then we can bring in some of the discussion around how do we actually look at the journey mapping and be able to put together the roadmap for how we can build out those specific interactions and touch points and look at how we can then put together the indicators and measurements around those things.
So then our second guiding principle is start where you are. And this is an interesting point when it comes to experience or even continual improvement. A lot of times people will go out and find out what is best practice, what are these numbers that we should be hitting, and what does this really look like? And yet what we need to do is truly start where we are. And if I refer back to that diagram I had mentioned, we had explore. And explore is where you're out and you're looking. First of all, we have to understand a lot of times from an IT perspective, we think that we are focusing on experience, but we often do it from the inside out. So from an IT perspective, or what I often say is a lot of times you'll see IT focusing on the user experience. How can I make this more intuitive? How can I make it easier? And HR focuses on what they think is the employee experience with some employee SAT surveys, and then they'll dole out some tasks potentially to IT. And the business might say we want to focus on experience, but they're really doing it more from the perspective of at least using those words and visions and missions and things like that. So when we're looking at experience, we're getting beyond the transactions. Yes, they are important. All of those operational pieces are important. And if you go back to what Jeff just said about value, it is a matter of how do people feel about doing their jobs? Let's just say we're focusing on employee experience. Can I do my job? Am I productive? Is it easy? If something's not working, is it easy to get back to work? So it's this more holistic view. And he mentioned customer journey mapping. So if we understand, one thing ITIL V4 talks about, especially in driving stakeholder value, are interactions and touch points. Interactions we're aware of. It's reciprocal. Somebody called us, we answered, right? Somebody downloaded something from our service catalog, but touch points we may not have any visibility to. It could be a private chat room amongst, a group of people. It could be a hallway conversation. So these touch points still impact how people are feeling in their roles or how they feel about the experience that they're having. And what we often talk about in experience is that we're really good at measuring transactions in IT, but it's not just those transactions that impact somebody's experience. It's what we call moments over time. So it's every moment. It might be when they showed up for work. Did they have a PC? Did it work? Was it easy to log in? So it's everything. So we've got to understand this end-to-end experience that an employee is having within our organization. And again, you can also do this for customers external to your organization, and just understand these moments over time. And there's a slide that I'll show you in a moment that gives us a better visual on how we normally measure our success and how we have to if we're starting to look at this end-to-end holistic, just the whole experience. So when we're gathering data, that's another part that's very interesting. When I teach an experience class, a lot of times people will say, oh yeah, we're measuring experience. We have net promoter score. We have our CSATs. Again, a lot of times those are tied, the CSATs are tied to transactions. So we've given you a few examples here. What you're trying to do is initially collect some hints and clues. And instead of the inside out, what does IT think? What are we hearing from people? What are people saying about their experience? So it could be comments in a meeting. It could be comments to a person at the service desk. But again, it's not tied to the ticket. It's just more holistic than that. And in the data gathering, that last part, you'll see that we say we do have to pointedly collect sentiment as well. Maybe something like Qualtrics or QStack. It doesn't matter what it is, pulse surveys, happy signals. How can we start to add sentiment to what we are collecting and then analyze it? I'll speak more to this, the analyzing of the sentiment, a little bit later. But in Explore, what you are trying to define is your experience landscape. Where are we today? What are people's perceptions? How do they feel about their experiences? What are their experiences? And right now, I'll let you feel like that might be a little soft, but I'll make it much more specific as we go through.
All right, excellent. So I don't know if anybody caught it, but so that Rayanne and I could each have 4 guiding principles to talk about, I pulled back in one of my favorite guiding principles that I think should still be part of the conversation. It's slightly embedded into Start Where You Are from a guidance perspective in ITIL 4, but I decided I wanted to pull out Observe Directly and talk to that one specifically. And I even pulled out the graphic from the ITIL v3 practitioner with the eye looking at you as we observe, if you caught on to that. And I think this is important because part of the guiding principle is tied to Start Where You Are. Like I said, the idea of not just relying on data and analytics, but really following that up and having the primary means of how you go about understanding a situation is to observe directly. And you see this coming out of lean and value stream mapping, which I'm going to show in just a minute. But it really does tie, I think, from a very important aspect to some of the things Rayanne was just talking about from an experience standpoint. We have to not just look at surveys or doing net promoter score. We need to still have those as part of our toolkit, but ultimately we need to be able to bring in some of the design thinking aspects and have that empathy and understanding that's gained through building relationships, working cross-functionally to break down silos, and understanding through that direct observation. And if I'm trying to understand, and I'll talk about this, like I said, in a minute with value stream mapping, what somebody is working on as they're working through the activities to get from demand to value, I can learn about how long it's taking them to do their work and what the level of quality is, which are a couple of the key measurement points from a value stream map. But I can dig way further than that too. I can ask them, how do you feel about how your job is going and what could be done to improve the process or how you carry out the procedural aspects of your work? And that can lead to even further improvements that might not even be part of the intention of the value stream mapping conversation or the improvement that you're trying to make from that larger strategic perspective. But those insights and the ability to really walk in someone else's shoes hypothetically and to be able to work on improving those relationships and to collaborate. If I can do those things at my service desk and, as Rayanne mentioned, get that sentiment data to follow up and drive continual improvement, if I can empower my agents that are working at the desk with the right tools and technologies, that's going to help them do their job better and maybe be able to focus on those things more than what they're currently able to do, I think there's a lot of opportunities in this space to observe directly. And like I said, I feel like this is a guiding principle that deserves to be part of the conversation of 8 and not just 7. So as I bring forward the visual here with a value stream map, again, you see this example from the value stream mapping fundamentals class that ITSM Academy teaches. And we look at employee onboarding as a great opportunity where you see cross-functional groups working together. And I can make all kinds of assumptions around where these things are happening and how long they're taking and what the level of quality is, but also around what's the experience, and the experience information that I gain through hearing some of these hallway conversations or gathering feedback as I'm observing directly can lead to insights that might not just help me improve this value stream, but it also might help me get to the point of where the experience of carrying out these different activities can be improved as well. I think that that's a key important point that we sometimes lose when we're taking a look at just process or just looking at activities and not bringing in the experience dynamic into that conversation.
Which takes us to progress iteratively with feedback. So I think you're seeing a trend. We see a trend across the guiding principles, of course, but it is communication, right? And it's asking. When we observe, and Jeff made that point very clearly, we have to have these conversations. And I like that he had the agent piece up there. If you are working on the support side, there are a lot of times when we are improving processes for the people that we support or the people that we're providing our products or services to, and we're not really coming back and measuring or having those conversations with the people that are carrying out the tasks to be able to deliver that. So when we're looking at experience, we want to look at both sides of that. If we're changing some of how we do this for the people that we support or provide our services to, how is it impacting the people that are actually carrying that out as well? So progressing iteratively, of course, we're going to get started. Experience, like ITSM, like service level management, is not a switch that you flip, right? And so hence the framework. We start to find out what our landscape is. We start to understand, we're starting to pull that together. And what's very interesting is when we start giving a focus on experience, we look at things differently. We might ask some different questions. We might also feel like our particular or personal role in it, or our team's role, is different than we had anticipated before. So I told you before, I'll leave it as you thinking potentially that it's soft. I've had people in class say, well, my boss thinks that sentiment is soft. Well, then look at develop XLAs. We're going to, well, actually blend of art and science. It's a matter of when we say it's an art, we do need to have people who can look at the sediment and understand it and be able to connect it to a lot of other data points that we're collecting that we both mentioned earlier. So in the blend of art and science, what we're doing is we're understanding what sentiment is, how people feel about their experience, and it's giving us these hints and clues to look more deeply into our operational data. We've all heard about watermelon metrics, where we're hitting all of our numbers, but if you have a hallway conversation, it's not very positive. Or there's a statistic, an advanced and board study from a couple of years ago, where 55% of employees said that they maybe submit 50% of their issues back to IT. And in fact, I had somebody recently who said that they had the tool, the technical data, they have the tool to measure crashes on a device. And they decided that if a device crashed 3 times, he would have somebody on his team call that person and ask them if they have a ticket. And 95% of the time, the answer was no. They just suffered in silence. They just rebooted. So that's what this is doing. When we get to the point of having XLAs, we'll show you an example in a moment. Now we are connecting. We're connecting the sentiment. We're understanding what most impacts that experience and that sentiment around it. We're connecting it to operational data like our SLAs and more. And then we're taking it all the way down to technical data, because now we're getting this holistic view that we talked about earlier. And on the back end, you're going to have a dashboard, which I'll show you toward the end, that aligns these metrics, gives us an experience score, but also allows us to monitor and see, we might be going in the wrong direction here. You don't act immediately, but you watch the trend. And a lot of times you can drill it down to what might be making that happen. So that allows us to adapt our strategies. And I want to speak to the one point, this psychological perception, and just give you an example. sometimes we can't fund an initiative to get a great permanent fix. One of the examples we use in class is baggage claim. So maybe that's on the radar 2 years out that we're going to totally replace our baggage system. However, we can't. But people are complaining. Well, there's something called psychologic where people tend to be less happy when they feel like they have no control. So us not keeping them updated goes back to the communication. Them having no insight into progress can make people feel less happy, right? So psychologic is how can you give people a sense of control and make them feel better about the experience? So a pizza app is a perfect example. You say, oh, look, they put the toppings on my pizza. Oh, my pizza's in the oven. And yes, I got that message that told me that when it was going to be ready, but I didn't necessarily believe it, potentially based on my past experiences. But now I'm watching it get built, I'm watching it cook, and now I think, okay, I'm going to go pick it up. And we find that when we do things like that, even if it's just a temporary solution, even Disney, it's lines letting you know how long you're going to wait, then we feel better about the experience overall. And we can continue to enhance. So if you
Yeah.
go to the next slide. And so this is an example of what we call the XLA stack. And a lot of times people think when you start talking about XLAs that you're going to just replace SLAs, but this is showing you, no, that's not quite it. First of all, when we learn our experience landscape, when we start to understand how people are feeling about their experience, we start to find that maybe there's one experience that is a little worse off than the others. And we start to find out what most indicates it. And if you don't mind pointing out these, Jeff. So at the very top is the desired experience. We have found that people feel like we inhibit their productivity. So we want to provide services that do increase their productivity. So our overarching XLA question is, do your IT services make you more productive? Well, what we learned in our data collection, and some of that was actually through sentiment surveys, we found out that what makes them feel unproductive or productive, what is aligned with their expectations, are three key areas. First of all, if they can't be productive, how quickly can they get back to productivity? So what was their last interaction with the service desk? How did they feel about it? And then it's about their PC itself, right? So how do you feel? How happy are you with your PC's performance? And then the other is potentially like a specific business app that they use a lot. How do you rate that? Now, notice these questions give you the opportunity to put a scale on the back end. Now let's go back to how was your last interaction with the service desk? You now identify who's responsible for that interaction. In this particular case, it's the service desk team. Now we're at the bottom. So it's our experience data on top. It's our operational data on the bottom. So now we incorporate what we're measuring either as KPIs or on our SLA targets. So it could be your ASA, your first contact resolution, your talk time. If we move over to the PCs, we say that the end user computing team is responsible for that. So we're looking at things like boot time, the storage space, is it having crashes? And if you start thinking about some of those metrics down there, sometimes this is through your technical data, like a NextThink or something that's letting you know, or your monitoring tools, what's happening at the device level. And then on the business applications team, depending on what that app is, I had somebody in class recently who has an EMR, like they use Epic, it's a healthcare, and that's outsourced. So that would be your outsourcer here. But internal to an organization are business app teams. And then we're going to look at potentially hung sessions, crashes, response time. So now we're starting to put these pieces together. And this is our XLA stack that is starting to show, we're talking about this experience. Here's everything we have to monitor and measure to know whether or not we're improving that experience. Did you want to add something, Jeff? You had that look on your
Oh, I
face.
was just going to go back to your example with the luggage, right? Which I think is funny, right? When you take a look at that expectation, right? That's part of why I think we walk so far from our gate to get to the luggage, is because then you don't have the perception that you're sitting there waiting around, right? It hopefully is showing up about as long as it takes for that 15 or however long minute walk to
It
get
is
from
true.
your gate, get from your gate out there. So it kind of just reminded me of that, with tying that in with your pizza example there too.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, awesome.
Oh, and this is just a different view of that. This is just kind of pulling it all together for you. So I do need to, I didn't make a comment on that top part. This is not done in a vacuum, and it's not really just let's make everybody happy. And there are some random comments and feelings that aren't going to be the math. It's not going to be where we focus, but the business outcomes, which is what Jeff's pointing out. That's what this is really important. If we have more productive employees that are more highly engaged, we're going to have better results. We're going to deliver a better customer experience. So this is just pulling those pieces together. The ambition is the desired experience. And then you see all the different indicators, and you also see where CSAT and Net Promoter Score fall, I guess.
Yeah. All right, very good. All right, we'll go ahead and keep moving forward here. Next guiding principle is collaborate and promote visibility. And when we talk about experience, I think this is true with this as much as it is with innovation and some of the other things we talk about in our modern IT organizations, which is this can't be done in a vacuum. It can't just be one area or one small team focused on driving experience for the rest of the organization. Everyone has a role to play, whether that's they're front stage and have a direct aspect of that customer journey, or maybe they're backstage and they're part of some of the behind the scenes pieces. Those still can be part of what ultimately makes or breaks that interaction or that touch point. And I think it's really important as we look at breaking down silos and thinking more horizontally, which is a big part of what the essence of experience class that Ryan was alluding to, and some of that upcoming content that's being refreshed is going to be talking about, is how do we create the relationships and the connections and work together in a more collaborative way, whether that's internal to our teams that are helping to provide that customer user experience, or when we're talking about employee experience. People are going to be much more bought in when they have a direct involvement, when we're able to build the right relationships with the right stakeholders, and recognizing that it might not be just the big rocks, but sometimes those small pieces that make up those moments over time can have an impact that could ultimately be a moment of truth. And we might not be even aware of that initially as we're taking a look at what we're collecting and what things we're doing. So involving buy-in, getting the right people involved in decision making, making visibility a priority. And we talk again, especially from a service desk role, because we are that first point of contact in that place where we're capturing a lot of the demand for requests and for incidents. They need to be providing that feedback to our other team members, and not just looking at experience, like Ryan said, is just the traditional IT aspect of that, but really looking at it from an end-to-end perspective and recognizing that we're not going to have any one person that understands the full end-to-end. We have to work together as a team when we're talking about not just our products and services, but really taking a look at that overall journey map that we talk about with this. And so that's where I bring in the larger view from the drive stakeholder value class of the customer journey map, and just recognizing that as we're collaborating and promoting visibility, this diagram is showing that we have different teams and roles that are potentially involved as we walk through this journey. And for those of you that aren't familiar with the drive stakeholder value class, it creates a 7-step model for creating a customer journey based on these high-level phases of explore, engage, offer and agree, onboarding, co-creating, and then realizing value. And it talks about the fact that there's roles and responsibilities, not just with the service provider, but also that the service consumer can play a role in to help potentially shift left some of these activities and make it to where we can be set up to be more successful. And as we collaborate and promote visibility, there's this concept in the class around having a line and a band of visibility. So how much can we see inside of each other's organizations, and how much trust are we willing to have between the two roles involved with provider and consumer? And then when we look at the service provider teams and the roles that they play, and we're trying to build out the details of these steps and of looking at these different interactions and touch points, that can help us to figure out, one, what role do they play in this, but also maybe there's things from an employee experience that are going on down here that are keeping these customer and user experience pieces from being as successful as they are. So I look at this as not just about this top line here and capturing this data, but what's the underlying root cause potentially, or potential causes that could be leading to that. And if we have this alignment and this understanding of these teams and the roles that are involved, I think we can potentially address both of those aspects and not just look at it at the high level. And really important, I think, when we look at collaborating and promoting visibility and wanting to have that experience conversation happen at the right levels.
So that leads very nicely into thinking work holistically. And I finally figured out, I remembered what my students can do in class. So I do have my pointer. The first is that end-to-end focus. And this is a little difficult sometimes to have that true shift. You know, there are some people that believe that measuring the transaction is measuring success, but let's think about it from a support perspective. If they called support, we've already failed as IT, right? Because people aren't having the experience that we expect them to have with whatever the service is that we're providing. So going back to what he said about, you know, working together, we should all be focused on experience. It should have us view it differently. So we want to go from this transactional, yes, it's important. Those transactions are a part of it, just like the XLA stack that we saw. However, it's not all of it, and we want to try to understand all of it. So this is where, again, we go through these operational metrics each, and I'm going to show you a slide in a moment that will give you a visual along this. But if you think about all the different groups within IT, we all measure our efficiencies in this best practice way, right? This is what we should be able to do, like availability. We should have, you know, 5 nines of availability. We know that that's what's expected. However, that's one aspect of the overall experience. So we want to all departments to understand their respective areas, but we want them to then look up, right? Like, how does this impact experience? So that everybody feels this onus to help with the experience. And we don't get this between teams, and we aren't so heads down in our particular area that we're not understanding this experience that we're creating. So it goes back to some things that we've already talked about: the journey mapping, the sentiment surveys, pulse surveys, operational and technical measures. All of these allow us to grow our comprehensive insights. So we're changing perspective. We are going out and asking, and we're learning, and even to the point, I don't know if any of you know Nate Brown, but he's really big in the CX space. And years ago, he had this job where he was running a call center for products, and they started telling him that they were hearing complaints about a product. So he has the CX magic button. It's just going into the USB port. It's like it's easy button. It was a visual reminder that if somebody makes a comment, click on this. It opened up a page in the CRM tool, and they just grabbed the comment. It didn't matter who it was, just what was the comment and about what. And he started to see some frequency in some of the comments. And he went to the product people and said, "Hey, we're starting to hear this about the product." And they're like, "What?" And so then they wanted to meet and they wanted to hear what people were saying. And then they could dig down into other data or performance or whatever it might be and start to see, wow, okay, this is what happened. This is why this is happening. Here's what we have to fix. So it could change how we prioritize across our entire organization on where we focus to make a better experience. So if you could go to the next one. I personally love this slide because I feel like it just brings all of that together. So first you see that we talk about SLAs. A lot of times those are in silos. What's the service desk response and resolution? What's the response and resolution in an operational level agreement? What are we expecting from our vendors? So we tend to have all of these service targets within those particular areas. Some may call these silos. And we still need to have those measures. They're still very important. However, it goes beyond these individual components or individual groups. And now we start to look at that end-to-end holistic experience. Onboarding is not just about your PC. It's about everything else as well, right? So HR and IT are equal partners in improving this onboarding experience. And so when we are measuring experience, we're hearing people's comments, we see what most impacts how they feel about that experience. Then we start to look at what we're all doing differently. And I will tell you that in classes, I have heard from a few organizations that are somewhat mature, or at least they have a few XLAs out there, and they're saying that they went from high triple digit SLAs to low double digit SLAs when they started to align those SLAs with the overall experience. Go ahead, Jeff.
All right. One of my favorite guiding principles for those that know me and have taken any classes from me is this one: keeping it simple and practical. And when we think about experience, I really like the idea, and I hear this from Donna Knapp, so I'll give her credit for this comment, right? We want to make it easy for people to do the right thing. And we can do that through simplifying and working smarter, not harder. Minimizing wasteful activities is part of what we try and do from what I talked about earlier with value stream mapping. But if we try and apply that experience lens, it really does get into that overall drive. And fortunately, we've seen some of that with ITIL 4, where we're not trying to have things being overcomplicated or bureaucratic when it's not necessary, right? We don't want to necessarily have these 30-page process documents that nobody reads, that we've not updated in 5 years, but we still think they're important and we still put them out in front of people to follow. Right? Back to the whole idea of the experience of a process practitioner, right? If I'm doing a good job as a process owner or a practice owner, I need to be making sure that I'm getting feedback and having those conversations through the people that are carrying those activities. How hard is it for me to implement or fill out a change request, for example? And how long is it taking for me to actually get my change authorized, especially if it's something that's low risk and maybe shouldn't have to come to CAB, but you're making me do it anyway? Those types of things are out there. And I think it's really important to look at keeping things simple and practical. It ties in nicely with focusing on value. And from an experience standpoint, if we can use our tools and technologies to make it easy to communicate and to collaborate, if we can get rid of unnecessary meetings as a big form of waste, one of the things you see in the ITIL content around keeping it simple and practical is respecting people's time. How are we doing with respecting people's time as part of the experience and not pulling people into unnecessary meetings or having so many things on people's plate that we're constantly context switching and we feel like we were busy and had all kinds of activity, but we end the day and we don't feel good about it. We end up in a situation where it was all activity and no productivity. Does anybody relate to that? I know I certainly do on certain days. And I think that's a really important part of this, keeping it simple and practical, is having that experience lens, only documenting things that are essential. And obviously we've got to work within legal and compliance requirements that sometimes dictate that we need to do certain things, but really trying to even apply some of the things that you would expect to see from the Agile Manifesto here, and just what we emphasize as being important, and really taking a look at how that can be used as a mechanism to drive positive experiences, especially from an employee experience standpoint. I think it's worth calling out and adding to some of the guidance that you see from ITIL with this guiding principle and putting that experience lens on it.
Which leads perfectly into optimize and automate, and a lot of what Jeff said about, respecting people's time, whether it's our own employees for their own roles. And we all know that people will find shortcuts, right? They're trying to decide what's worth it, what is worth my time. So even small changes, minor adjustments, can make a huge difference. And this might sound like an incredibly silly example, but there's a survey for our local grocery store that also has gas. And whenever you fill out a survey, you get on your last receipt, or last time you went there, you get 50 points toward your gas price, right? Like money off your gas. So my husband makes me do it every week. But anyway, it used to like take a long time, and I know that's why he made me do it, because he just doesn't like fumbling on his phone, and he's just like, here, you do it, you're faster. Well, it felt really slow because it would have every possible thing you could buy. Did you buy dairy, meat, center aisle? And you had to scroll through all of this. Well, just lately, it's awesome. It's like I just put NA for dairy, it closes. NA for meat, it closes. Now I can answer within this, and it takes me what took probably 2.5 to 3 minutes, even when I was moving fast, is now taking seconds. So to me, I feel like they're respecting my time more. I feel like it's a lot easier. I'm more likely, honestly, if it had just been up to me, I probably wouldn't even do the surveys anymore. But now they're fast, and so now I don't mind. Yeah, sure, I'll give you a couple minutes of my time to do this. But before, I found it a little bit grueling. Even when there's a number, a long number you're putting in, and it moves to the next field, just simple little things can really change the experience. being able to set people's expectations, being able to let them know when something's going to happen, even having them have a tracker, whether it's on tickets, a project, a request, anything along those lines. So it goes back to simplifying, and that's what Optimize and Automate is all about. It doesn't necessarily have to be automated to be optimized. Just smallest little things, and we'll hear those comments. We'll hear people say that, that I wish it would do this, or I wish it didn't do this. And we have to start tuning in and finding out, this is all about customer effort. How can we reduce the customer effort, but don't reduce it to the point where you're putting that burden, you're shifting the burden, or you're shifting the burden on the people delivering the service, because then they'll shortcut it. And we know we won't get good trending information. We might not deliver a consistent experience. So we're trying to lower their effort, make it easy, make it quick, make it intuitive, if that's what they think is important. And then when we're really looking at all aspects of it, it could be aspects of user experience. The examples I gave you were really user experience related. And then the employee experience. How do they feel about being an employee of this organization? How well equipped do they feel that they can do their jobs? How productive do they feel like they can be? And ultimately, we can turn that to the customer experience, because now they're starting to tune in differently as well. When there's a comment, I remember distinctly way back when I worked at Westinghouse, where the service desk was just saying, if I hear one more customer say that it takes 3 clicks to do this in their order, I am going to scream. But then we sent them out there to enter orders at the end of a month to help inside sales enter orders. And they came back complaining about having to click 3 times. And they said, do you know that if they didn't have to do that, do you know how many more orders they could put in? So now they had this whole different experience. I mean, this whole different perspective. So that's what we're trying to do, is look at everything from that perspective, and then starting to innovate. What can we do to make that better? And where we can automate, let's automate. And if we can streamline, if we can respect people's time, we can give them back time, we can allow them to be more productive, we can make it less manual. Any of this can help them feel better about the experience. And then on the back end, we want to be able to measure that. And there might be a point where we've really mastered a particular area about what impacts people the most with this experience. And so maybe now we need to fine tune in another area, so that could actually change your XLAs. So again, we're going to look at all that data. And if you go ahead and bring up the next slide, this is an example of a dashboard, and I'm not going to go deeply into this, but pretty much I talked about X data, experience data, O data, operational data, which we're all very familiar with, and then T data, which some of you are more familiar with than others. So these would be your experience questions, the sentiment questions that are being asked. This is your operational data down here at the bottom. And so these are different measures that we're looking at. And then this is your T data. So this might be the crashes, the hung sessions, the performance time. And there's a whole back end of this, of course, that's calculating numbers and giving us an overall current experience score. But the trending part is what's really important. And we would have a team that's focused on this. And if we start to see sentiment change, then we can actually drill down to the operational data and the T data and see if we're seeing something that could be causing that change in sentiment. Maybe it's an older device and now we've got new applications on it and it has slowed down. So it gives us visibility that leads back to having this comprehensive view and trying to look at the experience as a whole.
Yeah, excellent. And I like the fact that you're calling out the trending part of this, Rand, because ultimately what I think a big part of this is just to understand, and this goes through the life cycle that you showed earlier with the experience framework, is just understanding what is your current state as far as what you're able to do and what's the desired state that we want to get to, and how can we start to take a look at how we're moving over time with that. So I really like that we're showing an example of what that could potentially look like as we mature and build into this experience framework area. All right. So in summary, we take a look at ITIL 4 and experience are not intended to be separate things, but they're intended to work together. And the goal for Rayanne and I was to show how we take a big important component that's really about the cultural aspects as much as anything else with ITIL 4 as we look at these guiding principles, things that should be foundational and shouldn't shift over time, but should be there for the long term, that ultimately help frame our approach for our behaviors and ultimately our culture and help us to adopt and adapt from our various frameworks. And experience is something that I think was really just starting to emerge when ITIL 4 was first being introduced, at least from a formal standpoint. Not that experience hasn't been around longer than that, but really taking a look at it as an opportunity to look at these things complementary and being able to align those guiding principles, including my extra one with observe directly, which I'm again think's important one, as we've talked about, to experience management and how does that help drive and enhance stakeholder value, help us to look at all those aspects of employee, user, and customer experience, and ultimately build the right focus and the right relationships so that as organizations, we can ultimately align to those larger business outcomes. And just that focus on outcomes in general is another key piece where I see ITIL 4 and the experience piece coming together. Is it's not just about the individual transactions, but it's the moments over time. It's not just taking a look at the deliverables as our products and services, but really what's the business outcome that all of that is trying to achieve. And I think if we stay focused on value from that perspective, that's a big part of where we can take this. So that finishes our presentation. Want to make sure, I know some folks have to drop right at the top of the hour, so we have about 10 minutes left for some questions and answers and feedback from the group. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and see if we can take a look at answering any questions that anyone has. I see Ryan already jumping in and has a hand up. So go ahead, please, Ryan.
Yeah, I do have a question, Renee or Rayanne. So what are you seeing for adoption of XLAs in the industry? And are you seeing practices like relationship management and SLM, are they driving a lot of the adoption in organizations?
That's a really great question. First of all, I see the maturity outside of the US much stronger than what we're seeing inside the US. But now we're seeing a lot of traction. And in fact, I've got a panel that I'm going to facilitate at conference, and we just had a meeting today. And a couple of the people said that now they're starting to see that HR is coming on board. What I've seen in the classes is it's been primarily IT, and it's not been relationship managers, or I have had continual service improvement. A lot of times they'll be the ones that come in, a lot of support people, a lot of people looking for user experience, right? They don't necessarily have the understanding. So what I am seeing is more people know they've got to do something about experience. And now it is gaining traction where executives, you see it come from a couple of different ways, from the bottom up, right? We've got to fix something, fix some kind of experience, and now we're learning a whole lot more. Or you see it from executives saying something's not quite right, it's got to change, or just realizing that it is a bigger focus and that we don't have any understanding of end to end. So I love that you asked that question, and I'm sitting here thinking, yes, why aren't service level managers or relationship managers coming? But I do think it's a new concept, and I think some people think they know what it is, and then I certainly see when they come to class, they walk away like, that is not what I thought this was, right?
Yeah, I can
Great
see the
question.
advantage of your customer success teams or relationship management teams, because if they're asking the right questions and if they know how to ask those questions, there's a lot of subjective information that builds into that sentiment that they can
Yep.
bring into the organization, and then having that pipe to feed it back to the respective areas in the organization. So that's really important. Yeah,
It
no,
is.
thanks for answering that.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I think that that is an important part to get started, is just to know that these anecdotal comments, or these comments that we're hearing, they do matter. And in IT, we usually sift through that and we don't document it, but we do need to document it so that we can start to see if there are trends. And then I think those roles make a lot of sense.
Yeah, and just having been to the BRM conference here a couple of weeks ago, Ryan, I can add a little bit to that perspective too, because I think a big part of, as you look at the BRM capabilities and trying to drive more positive and strategic relationships, if you look at that maturity model and they talk about moving from a service provider to a trusted advisor to a strategic partner, right? Where is experience in that whole conversation? What level of
Everywhere.
experience can help you drive getting through that maturity curve faster. I think it's a really important opportunity to look at how we can align things and not just look at experience as one of the attributes of one of the things that we should talk about as we're strengthening relationships, but it really needs to be more of a driver. And even if we're just trying to move, through the journey of, not being just an order taker, but really getting into those higher levels, if you don't focus on experience, I don't think you can ever really evolve to getting to that level the way that you need to be. And so as we look at framework alignment and opportunities to say, we're going to take different perspectives, I think it has to be that more, type of an approach, and look for ways to bring those pieces together.
That's a great point. Did you all feel like this was, oh, I see you're going to ask a question. Go ahead.
Are you talking to me?
Yes.
Oh, I was trying to find the hand and I couldn't find my hand. So I actually have had the distinct pleasure of working for a company that recognizes this from, the employee out, also, from the customer in, which is amazing. Do we track it? No, I don't think so. I don't think we're putting it into an SLA format per se, but I know that this company is very big on, hey, are you happy here? What can we do to help make things better? What can we do to help you advance in the company? They're very, very forward thinking on that, which has been amazing. And so it'll be nice to see this. I grew up in kind of that mindset, working under someone who ran a huge corporation in Montana, and to see this come full circle is really nice.
It is. It's the gap. It's filling the gaps, right? Did you all feel like this approach was good? And is there value in what we shared, connecting the two, the guiding principles and experience?
I saw value in it.
You did? Okay, good.
Lots of value.
All right, good. Good to hear.
Yep. Hi, Joanna.
Hello.
Any other questions or comments or feedback from you, Joanna, or from anyone else that's here? Ray and I absolutely would love to hear questions that you have or anything that we can maybe emphasize or focus on. Dennis.
Yeah, I want to ask a little bit more about the new 8th guiding principle, that observe directly.
Yeah.
The Jeff Jensen principle?
Yeah, which I really do like.
I do too.
But I guess I want to ask, and kind of just talking about the last one, how we would go about documenting that, or what would be some of the key, things we need to look for when applying that guiding principle.
Yeah, see, Joni has to drop. Thanks, Joni. Great question, Dennis. I look at it from a couple of different perspectives, right? Observe directly was part of the ITIL V3 practitioner class when there were originally, I think, 9.
There were like 12 then, right? Or something. There were a lot more.
I think I was thinking there were 9, but it's been a while since I looked. I taught that class a few times back when that first came out, and that class didn't get nearly as much traction as I would have liked to have seen, because I think it answered a lot of the questions around how do I actually go implement ITIL and how do I go implement service management. Unfortunately, a lot of it made it into DPI class, but not all of it. And they kind of I think they tried to simplify things for ITIL 4, and that's why they got rid of some of the guiding principles and tied them into some of the other ones where you see observe directly being a part of the conversation. Real quick, I know Rayanne had to jump, so she's got to go to a client meeting here in a couple of minutes. So appreciate her being here. So I look at it from the standpoint of, I try to tie it to value stream mapping, Dennis, where you need to go look at how people are actually carrying out their activities and measure them as far as how long is it taking in terms of lead time, looking at the cycle time or the processing time plus the wait time that it's taking to carry that out. But I think when you bring in the experience part of it, and I'm observing directly, it's asking more of those questions around what is the minimum expectation of what that experience should be like, and are we hitting that or not? And that sentiment data can be really important to driving those experience indicators for what I need to measure. Like we talked about, is there something specific to the productivity, where if my issue is with the service desk, and we're taking a look at how long maybe it's taking to do something like an onboarding activity or a procurement activity, we can look at that and say, okay, we're measuring this, but then as we dig deeper and look at some of the underlying causes, is there maybe an employee experience issue that's going on with why that's taking so long? Is there an issue with the tools and technology? Is there an issue with somebody potentially having to watch too many sessions going on at the same time, right? We can start to dig into and directly observe more of those things. I mean, I don't know if anybody's actually taken the time. I remember I had to do this in a couple of organizations where I had to sit down and actually sit at the service desk and work it for an hour as a part of, even though I didn't really report into that organization, just to understand what a day in or an hour in their shoes was like. And you learn a lot from that as far as what you can do to potentially help make that overall situation easier, not just for the value stream or for the customer, but also for the people doing the work as well. Is that kind of in line with what you're asking, Dennis, as far as your question?
Yeah, no, that was a really good answer. And it leads into my other question. So I had two. It leads into my other question because, and I think you really hit on there, about the employees, but also observing directly what is that customer experience to better understand that. And Rayanne alluded to or talked about, right? We don't always have visibility to all those touch points or moment over time. We're good at measuring the transactions and everything. So my other question is around, how do we measure? How do we get a feeling? Because I think the general way often it's done is through surveys. And often with surveys, right, we get what I like to say is the outliers, the people who are really, really happy, really, really not happy. And the vast majority of people in the middle don't take the time to fill out surveys. So we're really not getting a good representation of what that overall customer experience is.
Yeah. Now, I have an answer in my mind, Dennis, on how I'd like to say one way could be to approach it, but I'd be interested to hear from the larger group on what they think too. One of the things that jumps out to me with feedback is especially if you're in a historical situation where IT is more of an order taker and people, get flooded with user surveys after every single incident or service desk or service request transaction, that is it just noise and they're not filling them out. One, because there's too many of them and they're not targeted. And then two, are we actually doing anything with that feedback? Right. And not just addressing the things that are bad, like, okay, somebody had a bad experience, and so now I'm going to follow up with them to try and turn that around. But how are we aggregating that and using that in terms of the big picture? And part of what I like about the XLA framework is you really are trying to do that stack that Rayanne showed, where you're looking at the alignment to the larger business objectives. And if there's something around productivity, for example, that we saw in that IT example, what are the things that say, am I happy with these interactions? And how I go about measuring that needs to be more targeted. I think it's a matter of having some key, calling out some key stakeholders or super users and having one-on-ones with them. And then if they're bought in and it's actually going to make a difference, maybe they can help you reach out and get additional feedback where IT's maybe not even in the room, right? Or they're not directly part of the conversation. I've seen things like that work well. So those are a couple of ideas from my perspective. What does the rest of the group think? Ryan or Joanne, do you have any thoughts on what that might be as far as some of additional thoughts that you might have?
I'd say for me, some of the additional thought is I love the XLAs and the approach for it. And it's something that I utilize very much with what I do with the organization from a process and operational excellence perspective. But what I find missing from it is an understanding of the maturity level, right? And that's a layer that I think needs to be added into it, if you will. So even if you're doing it on the side, I think you need to build that into your process when you're getting these qualitative and quantitative measures from everyone. Add that in, get your perspective of what you feel their level of maturity is, and then get their perspective of where they feel at it in the spectrum, because it's generally very vastly different.
Yeah, it's a great point. And that actually ties in some with the BRM maturity model that I was referencing earlier to Joanne, how IT would rate themselves. IT probably thinks that they're a trusted advisor, but does the business actually think that that's the case? Probably not.
Exactly.
So those misalignments are a key point And I'm glad you brought that up. That's a great call out, knowing where that actually is and not just assuming that you're moving forward.
Well, and it's just because I always end up being the bridge between the business and the IT teams, and it's two completely separate ways of communicating, thought processes, the whole 9 yards. And you've got strong people who are great developers or architects on the IT side of the house, and they'll build something based off of what they feel is the most efficient. And then you've got a business user who's going, this absolutely sucks. I now have to add 10 steps to what I'm doing because you didn't do what I wanted, but they interpreted it that way. So there's that interpretative dance, if you will, that goes on between the two groups.
Absolutely. Well, and I know IT organizations that they don't even focus that way. Their job literally is we're improving our operational excellence because it's easier for me to do my job, right?
Yeah.
Without thinking about the larger context of what that actually means. That's
Yeah.
good. Ryan, what do you think on this?
Yeah, it takes me
question?
back to the age-old battle of service level objectives versus service level targets, and the objectives being the internal things that the teams think they need to design or develop versus getting that customer input. But in terms of, Dennis, what you were saying about, how do you kind of measure this and go about it? It feels like it's a larger focus than maybe just one practice. It's more of a program approach, because if you have those teams that understand how to gather sentiment and ask the appropriate questions to gather that sentiment and get the right answers, that can feed back in. But then, at some point there's the customer sentiment versus the customer satisfaction, and what's really transactional as filling out a survey. Like you were saying, you have the outliers or so, and when there's a problem, getting that input, or when they're very happy getting input. But what about those other times? And so it's that broader perception that needs to be accounted for. And it's not clear in my head where that accountability lies. And it's probably just a number of practices that have to come together to ensure that the questions are answered, that the feedback is coming into the organization, that it's, actioned upon and, incorporated into the design of different products or services. And so, yeah, I think it's a good focus. I just think it needs to be more developed going forward as to how to implement it. So that's why I was curious from Rayanne's perspective as to what she's seeing from an adoption standpoint of XLS, because it seems like it's a much, much larger initiative than just turning on satisfaction surveys or reaching out to a customer when there's an issue.
Yeah, and I was going to say, Ryan, I know this content's been around for at least 3 years, but it's gone through a number of refreshes and it's being refreshed again. So early into next year, we should start to see the more intermediate and advanced level classes around the XLA Foundation and then the practitioner versions of this coming out. And I'm really interested to see how we can get into the mechanics and provide some more of that detailed guidance around how to do all this stuff versus just some of the overview stuff. But we felt like the guiding principle relationship was really important, because the guiding principles kind of allude to experience in a couple of places, but they don't really call it out or tie that perspective together nearly as much as what we felt like there was an opportunity to do. So we're kind of trying to, add some thought leadership and kind of blaze the trail to tie those pieces together so that people that are familiar with those guiding principles can take it to the next level. And especially if they are trying to look at designing some experience indicators, they can use those guiding principles and have that fit into an overall approach that hopefully is a little bit more integrated and not just looking at it as kind of siloed frameworks. Yeah. So hopefully we are accomplishing that. What do all of you think?
Yeah, I think so. For the last slide, Jeff, that had kind of, I think it was the spreadsheet showing just the different levels of gathering, talking more about that real world example, I think would be really helpful.
Yeah,
just to put the pieces together, because this might be a lot of new material for the audience, and so they may have heard of it, but understanding, like you said, the mechanics of it, it's not clear in my head yet as to how it operates within a practice or practices. And so talking about that real world example, if Rayanne has that, that'd be helpful. And then on the very first slide, I maybe I missed it, but was observed directly listed on there? I don't.
Yeah, so that was my.
It was there. I did see it, but I didn't speak up. There was the I right in the middle, and I said,
I was like,
but it's smaller. It was smaller on the other. I said, I was wondering what is that, but I didn't speak up or say anything. But yeah, it was the small I right in the middle.
All right, I'll bring it. Yeah, and I that's kind of what I was trying to say is there's some additional.
Oh, I
that's
didn't even
typed
see
out.
that. Good grief. Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
I saw
I
it,
knew
but
you were
didn't
going
speak up.
for.
I thought, yeah, I didn't know.
Oh, geez. I didn't even notice that. I was busy. I was like, I don't see observe directly on here. I knew you were going for that approach, but
It's an Easter egg.
good grief.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice.
I was reading the fine print and everything.
All right.
No, but I like adding that in. You know, I'm a huge proponent of that
Yep.
as well, Joe.
Okay, well, I'm going to officially work on ending the recording. Before I do, I'll just announce real quick for the people listening to the recording as well as for folks that are still here. We are doing our next meeting on Monday, December 4th at noon as our target time. We're looking at bringing in Jeff Rumberg, who's presented at the ITSM Academy webinars a couple of times, and looking at driving a discussion on artificial intelligence and how do you measure that as far as an implementation and the value, and how do you set yourself up to be successful from an implementation approach with using AI tools and technologies. And I think that that's going to be a really not just informative and worthwhile presentation, but I think it'll really drive a lot of interest and a lot of excitement to take a look at where things are going. And I know I'm going to be interested when I go to present this presentation at Service Management World to see where some of the vendors are headed and how things are moving forward and advancing. So incorporating that into our ITSM tools, but also looking at it from that larger perspective. And appreciate Ryan helping to drive that meeting with Jeff to get him invited to go to our next meeting. So we're going to work on getting that officially put together from an agenda perspective at the end of this week and get that announced out on Meetup. And I hope that folks can make it. So appreciate everyone for being here. I know Ryan had to jump early. Appreciate the opportunity to collaborate with her on putting together this experience presentation. She's obviously just a wealth of knowledge and has a lot of time that she's invested into being a thought leader and a subject matter expert in this space, and grateful that she was able to be here to help present that today. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and end the recording, and we'll look forward to seeing everyone next time.